So this is from First Kings. Now we're switching to what's going on in Judah, the southern kingdom. So remember, we're going to go back and forth throughout the rest of this book. And now we're talking about Rehoboam, Solomon's son, king of Judah, not Jeroboam, the rebel who became king of the northern tribes of Israel. During Rehoboam's reign, the people of Judah did what was evil in the Lord's sight, provoking his anger with their sin. For it was even worse than that of their ancestors. For they also built for themselves pagan shrines and set up sacred pillars and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every green tree. There were even male and female shrine prostitutes throughout the land. The people imitated the detestable practices of the pagan nations the Lord had driven from the land ahead of the Israelites. In previous semesters, I've talked about the child sacrifice that the pagans in the Middle East, in the Promised Land, were practicing all around the Jews, who abhorred the idea of burning your children in fire to appease a god. But there were other things that the pagans did, including temple prostitution. This was widespread throughout the pagan world. And I haven't researched it much, but it's weird if you think about it, because both men and women would serve as prostitutes, either taking payment and performing sexual services, or sometimes for free, claiming that the sex they were having with their clients was a way of serving the gods and maybe encouraging the fertility of the harvest, or bringing the clientele closer to God in some way. This continues even until today. It continues in the sense that there are a lot of New Age, and even in some Catholic circles, notions that sex can somehow be a magic act, and that the very act itself can transcend the boundaries of reality and give you a power that you wouldn't normally have. It's kind of demonic. But this is even pushed in some Catholic circle, believe it or not, and is published by some Catholic publishers, stuff that implies this. But look at what's happening. I think one way of thinking about the history of the Jewish people as recounted in the Bible, the history of the people of God, which includes us, it's a history of how difficult it is to change. David is dead, Solomon is dead, the kingdom splits in two, and in the southern kingdom at least, well, in the northern kingdom, there are false altars to false gods served by false priests. In the southern kingdom, they've got these Asherim, these Asherah. We're not quite sure what they were. They may have been sacred poles. There were certainly things set up on mountains and hillsides. And there were male and female prostitutes bringing their clientele closer to God. This is, of course, absolutely antithetical to anything that God the Father has called the Jews to do and to be. It is a regression and a sliding back into the practices of the pagans that surround them. But this must have been common. I mean, it happens not too long after the death of Solomon, who built a huge temple to honor God the Father. And yet he's not gone for long, and they're not behaving as if they're Jews. They're behaving as if they're all the other people. But I mean, this is why I think we see, for instance, in Psalm 40, blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, who does not look to the proud, to those who turn aside to false gods. We see this condemnation of idolatry throughout the Bible, the Old and the New Testament. It must have been common. It must have been difficult for the people of God to see themselves as the people of God, as set apart for something. because it's easy to backslide. There's even this little tiny indication in the reading from Acts today. Peter heals um, a bedridden man, Aeneas. Of course, God heals him through Peter. And Peter said to him, Aeneas, Jesus the Christ heals you. Arise and make your bed. Then he arose immediately. I think of Jordan Peterson, who's popular in some Catholic circles and who has said some interesting things. Jordan Peterson, one of the ways he ministers to young guys, especially guys who have trouble doing anything but playing video games in mom's basement, is he says, get up and make your bed. Number one, because with that comes the idea that we have an obligation to get our act together. And with our healing comes a kind of desire to organize our lives and to live according to the order that we see around us, the order that comes from God and that's in society. So that you might notice if you've been depressed, as almost every one of my students has either been anxious or depressed at some point, that's endemic with you guys. If you've been depressed and then you start feeling better, then you realize my room's a mess. I got to clean this up. I'm really behind in my homework. I haven't talked to my friends that I like. And then you kind of get your life together again and you start doing things. It's hard to do that if you're depressed. With the healing comes even an attention to ordinary things and the order of ordinary things around you. But it's a step up. It requires energy. It's easier to backslide. It's kind of like when, I don't know if you guys take summer vacation because you're homeschooled, but when we took summer vacation, my gosh, how do you make the transition from summer vacation to school? What a pain. You got to get up early. You got to do all that nonsense. And it's so easy, especially after a long, let's say after a long weekend, especially after a long weekend, where maybe, if you're a teenager, when I was a teenager, I'd stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning on the weekends, watching old movies, walking at night in the country where we lived. And then, how on earth do you go to bed on time and get up on time when the weekend ends? Because it's so easy to backslide, just to live without any structure or focus in your life. And God is calling on his people, the Jews, and by implication, the Christians, and by implication, all humanity, because all humanity are God's people, to get their act together. But it's so much easier just to go to a house of prostitution and claim that you're engaging in an act of worship when all you're doing is satisfying your lust. Let's pretend as if it's a religious act, shall we? God says to the Jews, don't mess with me. Don't pretend that what you're doing is an act of worship. Don't set up poles to fake gods, false gods, because if you do that, you're going to start burning your children alive to Moloch, as the people around you have done. And you're going to start selling your own bodies, both men and women, and claiming that it's a service to the gods. Talk about blasphemy. But it's hard to get to that point. Okay, we do at least have to look at a little bit of what we're reading in the gospel. Maybe it ties in. If I can figure out how to tie it in, I will. One of the things that's interesting to me is they lead Jesus to the governor's headquarters, from Caiaphas to Pontius Pilate. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. If these scribes and Pharisees had entered into the praetorium, the governor's official palace and place of doing business, they would not have been able to participate in the Passover feast, the great feast which was at hand. And so they're sanctimonious. On the one hand, they won't defile themselves by disobeying a rather minor law, the point of which is to make them recognize what purity ought to be, but they obey the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law, while they kill God. These are the men who are trying to get Pilate to sentence Jesus Christ to death, but they're too special and pure and religious to enter the praetorium, lest they be defiled and can't participate in the great religious celebrations of the Passover. Think of the irony there. Men who are planning deicide, the murder of God himself, their creator. And even if they don't believe Jesus is God, they can tell he's a prophet, and they can tell he heals and speaks the truth. Even Pilate can tell that. But they're going to kill him. And yet they're going to obey a certain minor rule, so that when they obey this minor religious rule, they can pat themselves on the back for being religious. We also have a story of Judah himself, one of the patriarchs, seeking out a prostitute. That's earlier on. I got to wrap this up because it looks like, once again, the computer's giving me problems. Let me just ask you guys to do this so that I don't take any more of your time. Take a look at this dialogue between Pilate and Jesus. How would you characterize this dialogue? If this were a play, it would be one of the most modern plays imaginable. You don't get dialogue like this in ancient Greek drama. This dialogue indicates all kinds of presumptions on the part of Pilate. There's some sarcasm on his part, but also notice this. This is key to why you're in class. For this purpose was I born, says Jesus, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Pilate mocks him. What is truth? Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Christ is the Logos, the great principle of order in existence, as well as being the second person of the Holy Trinity and God himself. If you are of the truth, listen to his voice. That doesn't just mean be religious, because a lot of people are religious in the wrong way. It means learn, follow, investigate the truth. Don't be afraid of the truth. Don't mock the truth. Don't claim that there is no such thing as truth, which is what Pilate is implying. We are people of the truth. That means we are people of Christ. When I was an atheist, I believed atheism was true. I was therefore listening to the voice of Christ, not perfectly, because I had to listen more closely to figure out that I was wrong. But I was following the golden thread of truth to get me out of the labyrinth. That's what people of God do. That's our primary function. So that we can say we are backsliders. We turn sex into a magical ritual. We are people who cannot stay at a certain level. We are constantly making rationalizations for our sin and telling everybody how religious we are at the same time. That's all truth. And that's all what Christ brings to us. For he is the voice of truth. Follow that thread the rest of your lives. Don't be afraid of truth. Don't put up with lies from politicians. Don't put up with lies from the media. Don't put up with lies from the church. Follow the truth wherever it leads you. It won't be easy, but it will bring you to wisdom and joy, and it will let you know that there is more to life than winning or losing. There is a great ocean of contentment for those who follow the stream that leads to it. So, characterize for me, how would you describe the dialogue between Jesus and Pilate?